So I had the opportunity to do one of my artist residencies in two artist residencies actually in Taiwan in 2003 and in 2006. And the person I studied with, Alion, my clay mentor or clay master, turns out was also a tea master. So he judged tea competitions and he would have the tea farmers come to his house all the time. Thank you. Great, thanks, just in case, yeah. So he would have the tea farmers come to his house and like try out their new teas. So tea in southern China and Taiwan is kind of like wine is to us. When you brew the tea, you look at the color, you smell the nose, you taste it. There are different vintages, and the weather affects things, the soil affects things, and then what the tea farmer does with the tea after it's picked affects things. So anyway, these tea farmers would come to his house, and sometimes he'd get something that he thought was going to be really nice, and he'd call me up. He'd be like, Ali, the tea farmer's here. He's got some really good bags. You want some stuff? And so it was almost like a drug deal. It was like the DEA would never let me back into the States if they had been listening to these phone calls. But it meant I had the honor of drinking tea it was like way better than I ever could have afforded on my own. So an award-winning tea, this is all leaf tea, an award-winning tea in a bag this size could be several $1,000s for like the award winners. Typically, you would get tea in a bag this size, and it could range anywhere probably from about, now in today's dollars, maybe $12 to $50, $60, depending on how good it was. So I really kind of got blessed and was kind of a tea snob as I got to brew these teas with Alion. But tea really became a part of my life because it's very much a part of tradition. Brewing tea this way is very much a part of tradition in southern China and in Taiwan. And so the tea is brewed in a little tiny teapot. And these teapots are made in Yixing, China, which is Yixing. I think it's probably on that sheet. And the reason they do that is in Yixing, China, there's a beautiful clay vein. I'm actually going to stand while I talk this, make it easier. There's a beautiful clay vein that runs through the area. It's called Xisha clay, which is purple clay, translates to purple clay. But not because the clay is purple, although it kind of is, but because purple means the highest level, the most elite, like royalty wears purple. So Xisha clay, purple clay, is the most beautiful clay. And it's a clay that's very high in iron, which is why it's red. And it's also very high in silica, which makes it for a really, really tight clay body, which means you can throw a very thin-walled piece. If you listen to it, it almost sounds like porcelain, right? Like it's got this beautiful ring to it, which is not what you would typically have like in a stoneware iron-based clay. It's purported to be the best clay to brew tea in. Now, of course, whether that's Yixing saying this because they want to sell more teapots or not, I'm not sure. But the teapots are typically not glazed. Contemporary ones are now glazed on the outside, but they're still never, ever glazed on the inside. You always want to have the inside so that you get kind of a patina or seasoning of clay, just like a good tobacco pipe or a good cast iron pan gets better over time. It's the same with a teapot. And there are lots of different teas in China and Taiwan, from very lightly oxidized all the way up to very heavily roasted, almost chocolatey teas. And for that reason, you would never brew one tea in your teapot. You dedicate your teapots to a tea, and you often season them. So you go into somebody's house in Taiwan, and there might be 20 teapots like this up on the shelf, depending on how into tea they are. Not everybody's into tea. And what I'm going to show is really the most formal way of brewing the tea. So it's not like you wake up every morning and do this. So you can sometimes brew right in your tea bowl, but this is kind of the more formal way to get the most flavor, the most taste out of the tea. They often season their teapots. You buy a brand new teapot from the tea store. You might take the leftover leaves from the tea you brewed in the morning and boil them in a pot of water and put the teapot right in there and season it right off the bat before you even start to brew tea in it. So that's why I have different teapots here, because I'm going to brew theoretically 3 different teas. I'm actually going to just demo one, but I'm going to talk about 3, and there are going to be 3 for you to try. I'm going to brew 3 types of oolong tea, and oolong teas tend to be a leaf tea. They're a little bit lighter than a green tea would be. My favorites tend to be the high mountain oolongs. They're grown way up in the clouds, and it's because of the moisture in the air. And they're hand-picked. The good teas are hand-picked, and they just usually pick the last 3 leaves for high mountain oolong. So after the tea is brewed, and this is all stuff for you to look at later, but the tea in the bag is just kind of these, I don't know if you can see it, kind of these little balls of tea, of leaf tea. And again, this is up here for afterwards, so you can all come and look at it. After the high mountain oolong tea is brewed, those little balls open up into this. And typically, it's 3 leaves. The good teas are typically the last, and what that is the new growth, right? So just like you have that bright new growth on the shrubs in your yard, the tea trees have these bright leaves. So they would pick the leaves, and the better teas are all hand processed. They take a big, huge bamboo tray, and they put all of these leaves out to dry in the sun, and essentially what they're doing is oxidizing. And so the high mountain oolongs are not roasted, they're actually oxidized. And about partway through that oxidation process, they'll pick up the tray and just go, and they'll all flip over. It's like really, really cool to watch. And they'll oxidize the other side. And then just when they feel it's right, then the tea farmer, which is just like a vintner or wine master, knows when it's right, will grab all those leaves, and then they actually put them in an oven at a very low temperature to dry them out and freeze that moment in time. So it's not hot enough to roast the tea, just hot enough to get some moisture out, freeze the oxidation, and then they get rolled up into that ball, that little ball I showed you initially. In the old days, they rolled them by hand, or they put them in big cloths. Now they have machines to kind of do it. And then they get bagged up in the bags, and then again, come back out the other side as these little balls that you then put in your teapot and brew from. And so I'm gonna feed the orchid. So the tea table itself in one of these formal types of events would typically be set up with the tea master sitting here. And I'm not a tea master, I'm your host. I'm not a trained tea master, but I was with Leon all the time, so I actually did learn a lot. So your host or tea master would be up here. You would sit at the table, everybody would take a spot, and at your table would be 2 tea bowls, a tall one and a small one. The taller one is called a sniffing cup or smelling cup. And when I first brew the tea, I'm actually going to pour it into the sniffing cup. Then what happens next is the tea is poured out of the sniffing cup into your little tea bowl. After you pour the tea out, then you smell the nose of the tea out of the sniffing cup. And the reason you wait to pour the water out, there are 2 reasons. One is the tea is hot, so you don't want to get a blast of steam. The other reason is when you pour the tea out, what's left is a little bit of tea all around the edge, the surface tension that holds the water or the tea water on the side of the cup allows you to smell it without getting that steam and get all of the real little subtleties out of the teas. So when you all get your samples, I don't have 30 of these, so you're gonna have to just smell it out of the cup, but more formally, that's the way it would be done. You would then look at the tea in the cup, and you would look at the color of the tea, and then next you would drink the tea. And usually you do that in 3 sips, although you don't have to, but it would be 1, 2, and then 3rd sip. And you can gurgle it in your mouth, just like when you do a wine tasting and you sort of aerate it, you do that sound and make bubbles. So it wouldn't be uncommon at a tea tasting to have a bunch of people gurgling tea around the table, something we would consider, rude in our culture, but that's part of the tasting. But we don't consider it rude with wine, right? For those who do taste wine, it is common. And what that's doing is oxidizing or aerating the tea, like putting oxygen in the tea, which gives it a little bit more flavor. The same thing it's doing with wine when you do that, when you taste wine. The tea is served, as I showed you, in just these little cups, but you get it over and over and over again. It's not like you just get this little ration of tea. And the tea is brewed hot and fast, almost like, if you think about it coffee-wise, a tea in a big tea bowl or in a tea kettle is really kind of like percolated coffee, where this is more like espresso, hot and fast. If you overbrew it this way, it can get very bitter very, very fast. Lots of things affect the flavor of the tea, and this kind of, it's really not a ceremony, it's more a way of brewing tea. A lot of things will affect the flavor of the tea. One is how hot the water is. Two is, of course, how good the tea is, the quality of the tea and what the tea farmer has done. The amount of oxygen you put in the tea when you're brewing makes a difference. So even how high, so the tea leaves will go in here, even how high you pour the water into the teapot can affect the flavor of the tea. Now, I'm not that trained in that much nuance, but a trained tea master would definitely be able to manage that part of the tea brewing. So all those things, and then dwell time. How long you hold the water in the tea, the dwell time affects the flavor. Once the tea leaves are in here, the first brewing you don't drink the first brewing. It's actually called washing the tea. And then the tea host would actually also wash all of the teawares with that tea. So the teawares have been cleaned in a dishwasher, but it's kind of spiritually cleaning the teawares. It also starts to warm everything up because, again, the dwell time and the temperature in here affect how it brews. So the first brewing you actually really don't drink, and that just gets dumped out. The second brewing starts to have a little bit of flavor. The second and third brewings tend to be the strongest in flavor. And then after that, it starts to tail off. But in a really good tea, other nuances may come out. So you may brew, a host may brew 5 or 6 times from the same teapot before emptying it out and switching to another tea, or even if it's the same tea, putting that in. So that's kind of how the process will go. And I'll talk through it again, but it's a little easier to talk standing, I think, so you can hear better. So the tea table itself would have a place setting for everybody. It would have multiple teapots. If you were serving multiple teas, it would, of course, have the tea itself. There's usually a tea scoop. And after the ceremony, you're all welcome to handle this, because then your hands can get on it, because I'll clean it later. But that'll be used to scoop the tea. This particular one was my favorite one. I bought it at a street market. And it's just a piece of bamboo that's carved to look like a rolled up lotus leaf. So that's really the main piece of teaware. There are 2 other things that are often used. There's usually bamboo tweezers or tongs that allow you to pick tea up or take wet tea out of the teapot. And then there's also, almost looks like a sharpened chopstick that if any tea gets stuck in your spout, you can use to push the tea down or move the tea here. So those are up here as well, and you're welcome to handle any of this stuff when I'm done. And so that's how that works. The tea water itself is always spring water. Like, you'd never use city water with chlorine or anything like that. And we did use some spring water to brew this tea. But the real masters even have certain springs, like they'll only use it from certain springs. So the water is heated in the kettle. It's heated to a variety of different temperatures depending on the tea. And the real connoisseurs will have a brazier, something like this, that's got some charcoal inside. So you would have like real, not charcoal briquettes, but like real charcoal inside. So you'd have a little fire. So, sometimes they're even bigger if you're doing a lot. And that's how you would bring your water to a boil. How hot the water is varies by the type of tea. So there's a type of tea called puree tea. And it's a very fine flavor, very delicate tea. That tends to be about 185 degrees that you would brew that. Then baozhong which is one of the ones I'm going to brew for you, is a little hotter. That's about 190 degrees. And then the heartier teas are up at about 205 degrees, 205 to even 212, which is the boiling point of water. And then, so those teas are heated at a higher temperature. They do also roast teas in Taiwan. So I've talked about oxidized teas. I have one roasted tea here as well called Oriental Beauty. And Oriental Beauty can also be brewed at a higher temperature because it has had some roasting. And it's a medium roast, and it's going to taste more like the teas we're used to here in the States. And Oriental Beauty, I'll tell you the story of Oriental Beauty. In the Chinese language, in Mandarin, the name of it translates to puff of hot air, or kind of bragging. And so what happened was about, I think it was 90 years ago. No, yeah, it was about 90 years ago. This tea farmer had gone to market, and he had the opportunity to taste Indian and Sri Lankan teas. And he thought, wow, I want to start to make a tea that tastes like that. So he'd go back home and he worked on it and he'd bring it to market and it was doing okay. And then he'd finesse it, and he did that a couple of times. And every time he'd go to market, people would like it more until it got really popular and he was making enough money to keep making these teas. But he also became a braggart. He was like kind of bragging about his teas. And so that's where like puff of hot air came from, was he was like puffing out like how proud he was of these teas. But it turns out they were really, really good teas. And this is about 50 years now, Queen Elizabeth visited Taiwan and they had his tea for her. And as she's drinking it, she said, "Oh my gosh, this is an Oriental Beauty." And so that name stuck. And so that tea now is called Oriental Beauty. And that's the last tea that you'll taste. And that one is more roasted or more fermented, or not more fermented, more roasted. And so it's going to taste a little bit more like a tea that would be familiar to us. It's not quite as strong as an Indian or Sri Lankan black tea. It's a little bit redder in color, but it's got a nice honey, even honeysuckle-ish type of flavor to it. So it's got really nice on the palate. So the 3 teas you'll taste, the first one you'll have is actually going to be cold, and that's going to be High Mountain Oolong. Now that's typically brewed hot, but it's also really, really good as iced tea. And I thought, here we are in the South, so we're going to do one of them as an iced tea. And then, actually, I'm sorry, I did it in the wrong order. The first one you're going to taste is hot, and that's Baozhong, Baozhong is really kind of like the champagne of teas. It's grown in the northern part of Taiwan, usually north of Taipei City. And the Baozhong is actually just single leaf tea. So remember I showed you before it was 3 leaves with the High Mountain Oolong? The Baozhong is going to be a single leaf. And so after it's brewed, you know, it's a little hard to see, but again, you can come up afterwards. When it comes back out of the teapot, it is just single leaves. So they're picking individual leaves. It's really on the edge of what some people call white tea. There's a little bit of, like sometimes there's a little bit of a white tip on the end because it's an early growth, it's an early picking, and that's part of what that white tip is. That white tip actually keeps the bugs off as well. There are teas in Taiwan that are actually very highly regarded that the bugs are on them when they oxidize the tea, and apparently like adds a little bit of flavor. It's not like they're like bug ridden, you know, it's not gross, but yeah, like that is part of the tea. I don't have that one for you today. So anyway, the Baozhong, the hot tea you'll taste first, then you'll taste an iced tea, and that's a High Mountain Oolong. That's the one that's 3 leaves. And then the last tea will be the Oriental Beauty because that's the strongest in flavor. So just like wine, where you start with a light white, go to a Chardonnay, then you go to like a Pinot Noir red, and you go on to Cabernet. Like you just work from lighter to darker all the way through. So it's just really kind of the same idea. And again, I mentioned it's not really a ceremony. It's more a way of brewing tea. And so what the tea master or host is trying to do is get the most flavor out of the tea. And that's a little bit in contrast to the Japanese tea ceremony. So Japanese tea ceremony is the one with the bright green matcha, and where you would have your host, and traditionally was a geisha, where they take the tea bowl and they whisk it in the tea bowl. And that one, while it's a little bit about flavor, and there are better matchas, that one is really more about Zen and more about spirituality. If you ever get the opportunity to do the Japanese tea ceremony, it's really pretty phenomenal. It's like a 2.5-hour long event. I think they do it from time to time at Duke Gardens. There's a tea house at Duke Gardens down in Durham. And that one, when you get to the tea house, you have to walk through a winding path. So you start to immediately get into a Zen moment. Then to get into the tea house, you open the rice door, and the door is low. So you have to squat down to get in. And what that represents is everybody being equal inside the tea house. So, you know, whether you're Elon Musk or me, you know, poor local potter, right? Like you're still equal once you go into that tea house. And then once you sit down, there are a huge number of rules. You can insult your host depending on how you do certain things. Of course, as a visitor, like, you know, if you do it as a guest, it's not a big deal. But if you're really into that tea ceremony, some things do matter. But the geisha herself, or even a host, would typically have on a beautiful kimono, and they would be set up at the table. Their tea bowls would be behind them. They would have some hot water. They have this very ritualized, choreographed way of brewing tea. And again, it's all about getting people in this beautiful mood, in this beautiful Zen moment. She'd reach in and maybe pull out a napkin and fold that. And it's like beautiful origami, like just kind of ballet with her hands. So there's all of that like sets the tone. And then she takes a tea bowl and presents it to you. And every tea bowl has a face. The most beautiful part of the tea bowl is the face. And I mean, I got this exactly right, but like she takes the tea bowl and the face is facing her, and in 3 moves spins it and faces it and gives it to you, and you look at it, and then you turn it and give it back to her, and then she brews tea in it and whisks it and does the same thing again. And when you are all done, there's a little divot in the bottom of your tea bowl that holds just the tiniest bit of matcha, so you can look at that matcha, and that also is 3 sips. 3 sips, you drink the tea, and then you take your napkin and wipe that little bit out, and you turn the tea bowl over, and you look at the foot, you look at the, how well the tea bowl is made. And these tea bowls in a high end, you'd be using tea bowls from a national treasure. You might have a $10,000, $5,000, $10,000 tea bowl in your hand. I've never had that, but like at a high end, you would. And you'd look at the chop or the mark. The way we sign a pot here, they use a chop, they have a Japanese painting or Chinese painting has that mark on it. So the potter would do the same thing. So you would look at the chop and see whose tea bowl you had, which master, which national treasure tea bowl you had. And so all of that is again, all about setting a Zen moment. There's a little bit of overlap. There's a little bit of Zen, a little bit of Taoism in this tea ceremony, but it really is more about the flavor. So if you were at the table, you can talk. It's not like you have to be totally silent. There may be some dialogue. A really good host might be telling some stories, making people laugh a little bit. You might have the snacks would be next to you so you can clean your palate. And the snacks tend to be sometimes very lightly sweetened, or local fruits if that's the time of year. So not unlike cleansing your palate with crackers or something at a tea ceremony. But you don't have strong flavors. You of course would never put sugar or milk or anything like that in your tea. So that's kind of the whole story of what happens. So now I'm going to do it. And I'll talk through it again a little bit, but what a real good tea master is trying to do from a Zen standpoint or a Taoist standpoint is get in a state of Wu Wei. And what Wu Wei means is doing without doing. It's kind of like being in the zone. So he or she is brewing this tea, bringing the most beautiful flavors they can out of the tea effortlessly. Right? Like you sort of don't even know what's happening, and the next thing you know, you have this gorgeous, beautiful tasting tea in front of you. So Wu Wei is really the state that one would try to get in. All right, so the first step is to clean or cleanse the teaware. So I would take my hot water, pour it into an empty teapot, and take everybody's teawares. And pour into each cup. There are certain ways of brewing the tea that kind of everybody does. And then this ceremony does allow for some individuality of things. If I were to brew this tea in Taiwan for a bunch of people, they would probably consider my style a little bit sloppy. And that's okay. I kind of like that. For those who've been through all the other talks, I'm all about beauty of imperfection and wabi-sabi. So I almost brew in kind of a wabi-sabi way. You always brew over some sort of tray. This one's bamboo, but it could be rock, it could be clay. It doesn't really matter the material, but it is a wet process. You do kind of spill on purpose. So the next step, I do the sniffing cups for everybody, and I would clean their tea bowls and get them back to them. So again, this is ceremonially cleaning them. It's heating everything up. And then I also heat the teapot, so this is why it's a wet process. So this is not the sloppy part. This is done by all. And this helps heat the clay of the teapot inside and out, so that even from top to bottom of this tiny teapot, you have an equilibrium of heat. Because remember I mentioned that heat does make a difference in how the tea tastes. The next step then would be to fill the teapot with tea. And so I'm going to use some High Mountain Oolong tea. And you actually fill it fairly full with tea. When after it's all done and I open this up and you can all come up, you'll see that the tea really has filled the entire teapot. Again, kind of like that espresso analogy. So I'd pour some tea in. If you were here at the table, I might put some tea leaves in a cup and let everybody pass that around for everybody to smell or look at. So there is dry and wet of each, so you're welcome to pick it up and smell it. You can touch any of those. I'm obviously not going to brew those after we're done. And then pour water in the teapot. And it's okay for it to flow over like that. And then the dwell time is really just about 10 or 15 seconds on the initial wash. I think that wash, again, is kind of a ceremonial, spiritual washing of the tea, but it does do a couple of things. One is there is sometimes like dust and, clay, tea dust on the tea. And if you brew too long, it'll get bitter. And by too long, that might mean like 15 or 20 extra seconds. So this essentially is cleaning the tea dust off the tea. And then the other thing that it's doing is it's wetting the tea leaves and allowing them to start to open up because they were rolled up in that ball. The tea is so sensitive that, and sometimes in the beginning they do get stuck, the tea is so sensitive that what I'm doing now is I'm going from lightest brew to darkest brew, doubling up here and then going backwards. And as I get back to what was the lightest brew, it's now the darkest brew. And that allows everybody's cup to be an even amount of brewing. That's kind of the fancy way to do it. Another way to do it is to use a vessel called a gaiwan, which is essentially a cup with a top on it. And if that were the case, I would brew the tea, pour all of the tea out of here, so it's not sitting in the tea leaves getting overbrewed or too bitter, and then I would use that gaiwan and pour that from that gaiwan into here. I kind of like doing it this way. That's always been my favorite way, so I just do it that way. Now I'm going to heat the outside of the teapot again. And I only do that before people have used and touched these up to their nose. Right? But the way you would do it, if you were up here, is they tend to get hot. So you hold it with your fingers up top and maybe a pinky down below, and you pour it into a tea bowl, and then just kind of smell the tea in here. And so that's the way it would be done. All right, then the next brewing, pour the water in, and the really good tea masters, they'll like bring this way up here, the ones that are really practiced in show personship. So it's pretty cool to watch a real master do it. Again, I'm not that. I'm a host, but not a tea master. And then the brew time or the dwell time is usually only about 30 seconds if you've got the teapot fairly full. It varies by type of tea. It can be 1 to 2 minutes. Usually the labels say 1 to 2 minutes. But when I learned with Alion, he actually liked putting more tea in and brewing it, kind of hotter, faster, and felt like he got more flavor out of that. So, as an individual, you kind of pick up your own taste. But what's really interesting about this is what happens when you walk into somebody's house in Taiwan. Is you walk in and they immediately turn on the tea kettle. They wouldn't necessarily have a brazier going unless it was a more formal event. Like if you were visiting a potter and a potential buyer or something like that, they would definitely do a more formal tea with you with a better tea. If you're just a friend, they would probably brew a nice tea, and they might talk about the tea. Maybe it's new from the tea farmer, and so they could talk about the tea, say, I just got this, it's got this beautiful honey flavor, or whatever. So then the tea would go to everybody's place. And it's just done in order because after they taste the tea, they pass their smelling cup back up And you just do it over and over and over again, or switch to a new tea. So what happens at their place is, again, you take the sniffing cup, they pour it into their tea bowl, smell the tea, and then they would look at it in here and then just kind of drink it up. So that's how it goes. And again, all the while there would be conversation going on and things like that. And then after that, the tea master might talk a little bit more and have a little bit more stories. If you're going again to a potter's house, they might then go and show you some work. You know, just like a Sotheby's auction, make sure the champagne flows, right? You make sure the tea flows at a potter's house. But people always offer to brew tea. It's no different than us offering somebody a cup of coffee or Coca-Cola or a sweet tea or something if they walked into your house. But what I found is it created like a sense of transition. So when I was in Taiwan is a country about the size of New Jersey, and there's 20 million people of it. I mean, it's really just packed and paved top to bottom. And I lived in a little city of 500,000 people just south of Taipei City. And so it's loud, there's street markets, there's traffic, there's trains, there's like stuff going on, the hustle and bustle of a city going on all the time. And you walk into someone's house and it's still loud because Taiwan is a tropical island. So everything is like screen doors, or like you don't have carpet, you don't have drapery, you don't have any of that. Everything is either bamboo or porcelain tile or concrete, so it doesn't get moldy. So it's even still loud within someone's house. But the minute you sit down at their tea table, even if it's not any more formal than sitting on their couch around the same type of couch, same type of table we'd have, immediately the mood changes. The minute the tea goes on and you start to talk. And I could, people would sit down and they'll be talking Mandarin. I don't know what they were saying, but I'm a communications major. So it was really interesting to me to watch the human communication change as the tea started to flow. I would notice the conversation was probably very similar to, another hot day out there, the same way we do. And then it transitions into, did you see that movie? And by the time they're done brewing tea, 5 or 6 cups, there's a like really animated conversation going on. So it was this beautiful way of like closing out the outside world and being able to have more intimate moments with the people around you, with your friends. The other thing that I really took that was a real big takeaway, and then we're actually ready to wrap up for y'all to start to taste some tea. What the biggest takeaway from me from tea ceremony was, as an artist, was that I would be in Alion's studio and I'd get there every morning and we'd sit down and brew tea. Actually, sometimes we'd have a cup of coffee and then brew tea, but the tea does have caffeine. And then we'd brew some tea and we'd go to our tables and we'd start working on our projects. And every once in a while, out of the blue, he would just go, it would be me, him, and his assistant, or maybe even a friend was there hanging out, a couple of people in the studio. And out of the blue, he'd be working away and he'd go, let's brew tea. And you don't even know where it came from, and we'd sit down at the tea table and we'd brew tea and we'd maybe not even talk in the beginning and then we'd start to talk. But anyways, all this is going on. Every once in a while, I would watch him as he's brewing just go and look at his sculpture, like really subtly. And so what he was doing was stepping away from his work. The tea, it wasn't that he wanted tea so much or needed the caffeine. It was he was using it as a transition again, as an opportunity to step away from his work. And that was the biggest thing I brought back from Taiwan tea ceremony. Like, I loved brewing tea. I came back and brewed tea every day, and he would send me tea. Half the time he'd send me half bags. Like, he'd be drinking a bag, and then tea farmer would come with new stuff, and he'd save it all up and like ship some out to me at some point. But I set up a tea table at my house. This is up in Ithaca, New York. 2 things. So this is what a typical tea table might be like in Taiwan. That's a tea farm behind it. All right, so you go to a tea farm, here's the tea, right? Here's what they brew in wet. Remember, I said it doesn't always have to be what I have. There's the little Yixing teapot, right? All that, the influence of my work. There's almost always some sort of living thing or something that represents the season on the table. So of course we're in spring, so we have something spring. So there's some just very subtle flower. This might be where the snacks are. And in this case, they have this beautiful view. Here's your brazier with the tea kettle, heating water. So the guests may be sitting here and then the host here. and they have this beautiful view of the tea farm. So I brought that back into my life. And so this is up in Ithaca, New York, up in the Finger Lakes. And I like built my own tea table out of nature, right? There's a little Yixing teapot I can brew wet right on there and let it waterfall over here and get this beautiful wabi-sabi, different flow every single time. And this beautiful view out over the rolling fields, cornfields, wheat fields, spelt fields. And so I started to use it as a transition. So when I went to Taiwan the second time, when I learned to do the trompe, my first daughter had been born. And so I came back, and kind of the way it worked in my house was I spent time with her in the morning, and then I went, locked myself in the studio and got to like get in my mode and everything else. So I used the tea ceremony, this kind of the way Alion taught me, even though he didn't really teach me, to transition from crazy 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old time and energy to the mode that I had to be in to start to carve. And so this was the tea table that I used to do that, at least during the warm months. What was ironic was within a week, my daughter would run up every time out of the house and say, "Can I brew tea with you, Daddy?" And so I kind of lost that, but it became this really sweet time between us. So I didn't let her drink this tea because there's caffeine in it, but our garden was right here. And she would create her own teas. Like the best was mint chive tea. It's so freaking good. And she would just like pick stuff, and she had her own little Yixing teapot that she could use, and I'd be brewing the oolong, and she'd be brewing her mint chive tea. And thank you so much. And she'd be brewing her mint chive tea, and we would just have this special moment together. And there, as you can't see it, there's a pear tree and a plum tree, a Japanese plum tree right side by side to that. So we could pick fruit after it bloomed. So it really became this great transition. And then I did also use it in my studio. She'd go back in and have her day, and I'd start to work, but I would have those moments. Like any artist, you have to step away from your work, you get too close. And so the tea table served that role. So that's kind of how the whole tea thing goes. So folks are going to serve you up. The first one you're going to get is the Baozhong tea. And we kind of brewed this en masse because we had so many people. So I'm not going to guarantee this is going to be like perfectly on, but you should hopefully be able to taste the nuances between the teas. And again, you have a small serving. If you were really at a tea ceremony, you would get more and more, and you pretty much have as much tea as you want to have. So the first one is Baozhong. This is kind of like the champagne, single individual leaves being picked of tea. So it's got a little bit of a buttery taste to it. And I don't know if you noticed, but we've had, Min has been playing the whole time. It kind of disappeared in the background, right? It like Wu Wei, doing without doing. It just has created this beautiful, like spiritual sense within even a talking interaction. So we'll give it about 5 more minutes, and we'll get everybody some tea, then we're gonna turn it over to her to rock the place. For those that it might matter, the tea does have caffeine in it. You're not having a lot, and it's much less caffeine than coffee, but there is caffeine in it. Does anybody have any questions as your teas are coming around? Thoughts, questions? I don't think Queen Elizabeth put any milk or sugar in hers, at least not initially, because they would have served it in a formal way. Now, back in her hotel room, she might have said, "Get me some of that Oriental Beauty, but bring the sugar this time." Right, so the question was, do I clean things out? Do I rinse things out? All of the teawares that I serve in are cleaned in a dishwasher, and those don't get a patina. In fact, you almost always serve into a porcelain that's either pure white or very light celadon glaze like this is. And that's really important because you want to look at the color of tea. So even though you brew the tea in the great Xisha clay, you serve it into something light or white so you can see the color. So that gets washed with soap and water and sterilized and everything else. The teapots themselves, that I typically do wash, and it's okay to use a sponge in it, but I don't use any soap. So the same way you treat a cast iron pan. You do clean it. You don't want it to get moldy or anything like that, but then you let it just air dry and it gets that patina continues to grow. Yeah, the clay is a really beautiful color. I'm going to open these leaves up a little more. Oh, the tea is a really, really beautiful, beautiful color. All right, so the first tea you're going to get is Baozhong, which is the champagne type of teas. Then you're going to get the cold oolong. I really like to sun brew my oolong. So I'll take those little balls of oolong and just put it in a big mason jar and put it in the sun and leave it for 4 or 5 hours. Because the water's not hot, it doesn't tend to overbrew. And that actually makes a beautiful, beautiful light tea that you can just drink as iced tea or as sweet tea. Like in that case, it'd be fine to put some honey or sugar or whatever in it and make it as sweet tea. And then the last tea you're going to get is that Oriental Beauty from Queen Elizabeth. So now I'm going to quiet down for a little bit. We're going to listen to Min. She'll finish this tune that she's on, and then we're going to give her the opportunity to really rock and show how she's made her name in the music world. And then when Min is done, we'll wrap up. You'll be able to come up and look at anything you want. And you can also go down and view the exhibition. I'll go down there when it's done so we can talk about anything that hasn't been answered yet. All right. So thank you all. We'll let Min finish up. And then, I don't know, do you need to take a breath? Do you need some tea, some water or anything? Okay. So again, the virtuoso, the incomparable Min Xiao-Fen.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to same time you enjoy the tea and your cookie. I'm going to play some piece, okay? So I brought 3 instruments today, actually. As you see, my primary instrument is a pipa at the 4 strings and pentatonic scale. Sorry, the chromatic scale, we have 30 frets on the whole instruments. It's a chromatic scale. So as I played a lot of this, now I'm going to change it to a different instrument. So this is called a ruan, and people call it Hmong guitar, right? It's like a face, like a Hmong, right? Happy face. And and this is the tuning, the ADEA. In Chinese, orchestral, traditional orchestral, this instrument is it's kind of like a lower register, and just similar to the viola. All right, so the piece is called Under One Sky. Okay, it's my composition. So hope you enjoy. Thank you. Thank you so much. I have another instrument. It's called the sanxian. Okay, so sanxian, have you seen this instrument has 3 strings? It's all related to the pipa family. And it's been played 2,000 years, so it's a very ancient instrument. But this is a modern version, of course. And as you see, I have little frets on the fingerboard. So it's like this, right? The sound like this. And I have one song. It's called "xi xi cuo cuo." Xi means wash. Cuo means rub. The story I inspired by the little unknown, untold story about Chinese American and who lived in the Delta, how to say, the deep South, and lived there for over 1 century. And so they're doing run let's say, laundries, and also they run laundries and also grocery stores. If you see the Sinners, the film Sinners, they have one part of the story about those Chinese. They are running around, serve for the black community and the white community. So that story I inspired. And I used 2 Chinese words, just, xi cuo, xi cuo, xi xi cuo 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 xi, and to how to say, to interpret, okay, the wash and the rub. And if you want to join me, yeah, welcome. Just 2 words, xi xi cuo cuo cuo, qi qi cuo cuo, that's it. And other words, I just use syllable. So, okay, hope you enjoy. Xi xi cuo cuo, xi xi cuo 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 cuo, xi xi cuo cuo cuo, xi xi cuo 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 cuo, go go. Na basa sa yin, ga ga yin na bang bang. Ana yin ga sa sa jin sa 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 bang. 那个很哒哒哒哒那心抓抓抓抓抓抓抓抓，你要我。啊，是抓抓抓抓抓抓。我那个是啥玩意个呢？我要的那白的个不抓不抓。这是反正抓的抓抓。 ça qui sont bâton là, ça c'est ça. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes. I don't want to take too much time from you. First, I really want to say thank you. Eric invited me, and this is the second time work with him, and feel so honored to work with him. Also, I thank you for Wheeler invite me too, and such great pleasure to be here. And I want to play one more song for you. And actually, I just learned the bluegrass. The song's called Quipple, Quick. You know the song, right? Okay, this is my actually first time I tried the song. I hope I'm doing good. Okay, have fun. Thank you so much. Thank you.